one of the biggest announcements for taxpayers like us today was the reintroduction of standard deduction. While the announcement sounded good when we heard it, I think the net effect you think is going to be negligible. Why would you say that?
Yeah, it will, because what he has done is he has given us a 40,000 standard deduction, which was very welcome. And in the same breath, he has also said that two benefits that we were otherwise getting as reductions from our salary income will now no longer be available. So one is your medical reimbursements up to 15,000, and the other is the transport allowance that you got, which is 1,600 a month. So if you really compile everything together, the net impact is a meager 5,800 that you're actually getting. So somewhere you feel slightly disappointed because I think the overall, it's sort of starting with a wham and then disappeared.
Yeah.
So that's
so no changes in tax slabs,
nothing in tax slabs. Yes, I mean I think salaried people were expecting a little bit more. And even last year and this year, he started off making a comparison with people filing business income returns and established that salaried people were the most tax compliant and gave a fair bit of tax revenue to the government. But when it came down to the SOPs, actually quite limited. And of course, he introduced a cess which impacts everybody. But from a salaried perspective, this is at the end of the day perhaps not enough.
And do you think it's going to affect compliance? You would assume that more people comply to get some incentive for that.
I mean, it is more a feeling, I would guess, because salaried people are compliant. I mean, that's the way the whole system works, because they're all subject to TDS. So, but somewhere there's a little bit of benefit. Yes, if there were people who are not able to claim that entire 15,000 for whatever reason, then for them, yes, it would be beneficial. The other category is for pensioners, because they typically would not have regular claims that they would be making for transport allowance and all. To that extent, it helps.
Alok, if I can talk to you about the changes to medical reimbursement, insurance, all of that, what do you think, how do people stand to benefit?
So, for senior citizens, he's enhanced the limit for medical insurance from 30,000 to 50,000, and there was another deduction which allowed you to claim up to 60,000 and 80,000 for senior citizens and very senior citizens. So that has been increased to 1 lakh. Sorry. So on the senior citizen front, I think these are good changes, apart from the other changes with respect to exemption on interest from fixed deposits, which is now up to 50,000 for senior citizens. Earlier they were covered under the general exemption that applied to all taxpayers up to 10,000 for interest on savings accounts. So this exemption for 50,000 up to 50,000 applies for senior citizens to all types of deposits. So that's again a good move for senior citizens. Again, no TDS on any interest payments by banks to senior citizens. So this one was a long-standing demand from them, because at that age where they are primarily reliant on fixed deposits without any employment income, the TDS was an unnecessary hardship for them, because many times they would have to claim that as a refund. So that's a positive move. But if you just go back to the discussion on medical reimbursement of 15,000, which has been taken away, I think that seems a bit regressive, because on one hand there has been a demand from the salary taxpayers that you need to increase these limits, because 15,000 is way out of line with the current situation. And here we have not only got rid of the medical reimbursement of 15,000, but also the transport allowance exemption. So I think it has a big impact on the general taxpayers who are not senior citizens as far as their medical expenses are concerned, because the medical insurance deduction that is available does not cover your regular day-to-day medical expenses. Yeah. So I think that's I would call that a bit regressive as far as that change is concerned.
So when you put all this together for salaried people, do you think employers might be redrawing how this pay structure?
Possibly. I can't rule that out, because 15,000 is pretty much a standard thing that you get in almost all salary structures. Correct. On one side, I think employers will be relieved also, because they don't have to do wading through medical bills. But clearly, this is something which I think, and given that the medical costs are increasing every year, particularly OPD costs, it is a little harsh. It is harsh for employees.
Another thing that we were all surprised to hear was when the finance minister said that he's going to reintroduce long-term capital gains in equities. Clearly, there's a lot of potential, revenue potential over here for the government, because the last 2 years a lot of money has come into the equity market. But is 1 lakh too low a slab as per year profit to tax?
To my mind, yes, because I think what we've also seen over the last few years is a lot of retail investors, people who never invested in the
especially
markets
mutual
earlier,
funds coming,
now coming and doing it. So, which is a good thing for the market and good thing for the economy. And possibly because they were hopeful of getting better returns than they would from obviously fixed deposit interests are going down, and that is the chunk of people who are sort of moving away from the bank deposits into these instruments. But clearly 1 lakh, then I would have expected a higher threshold to tax the long-term capital gain, because last year when he introduced the tax on dividend, there also he gave a threshold of 10 lakhs. So it would have been better if it had been a higher exemption for the long-term capital gains as well.
And look, the other thing was also that there was no time limit. I would assume it would have been less harsh if you can say long-term capital gains, but under 3 years.
Yeah.
To
So
keep it open-ended was
right.
It doesn't give you much room for maneuver.
Yeah, most market participants were hoping that the change, if at all, would be just in terms of enhancement of the period, let's say from 12 months to 24 months perhaps, and not a tax. But to that extent, this is a bit of a dampener, that there has been a tax, and that too there's no indexation. So as you know, the indexation was a significant benefit available for long-term capital gains, but now there's no indexation, so it's a straight away 10% tax. And also the mechanism of grandfathering by excluding the appreciation up to 31st January is a bit complicated. So you would imagine that for individual taxpayers, they should have something more simplified rather than having to get the individual to try to prove the appreciation in the value of his equity shares up to 31st Jan, even though he may be selling it after a few years from now.
And do you think this will influence the retail investors' recent attraction towards investing in equity?
Depends actually.
Because they are long.
Yeah. See, it's
investors who hold.
there are two sides of two arguments to the same thing. So one is of course people perhaps who are earning between say 1 lakh and 5 lakhs, if I may put it like that. So for them it becomes a dampener. But for people otherwise who are below that threshold, I guess they would continue. On the other side, if they don't invest here, where do they invest? So because I think from all categories, the rates of return is pretty low. So earlier people used to invest in real estate, that's also pretty stagnant now, not going down. So part of it will of course be market driven. We hope that people will still make money and not shy away from investing, but we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. And given all of this, the government's primary support base is the middle class, is the Aam Aadmi, so to speak.
Yeah.
How do you think they rate this budget?
I think there will be an overwhelming sense of disappointment, at least where personally tax is concerned. People were hoping for increased deduction for medical expenses. People were hoping for, they were asking for standard deduction, but not in the avatar which has come.
Losing
Yes.
the medical and
Yes. I guess there was a lot of talk about long-term capital gain. So probably that expectation was there will come in some shape or form. But from a salaried income perspective, I think it is not enough.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's very disappointing for most salary taxpayers. But I would also like to add that based on what this government has been doing over the last few years, their focus has been to target the rural sector, the ones who are in need of the basic necessities. So he's talked about healthcare. So they are going to spend a lot of money on healthcare and other welfare schemes. So I'm not surprised in that sense, because they tend to try to address that part of the population rather than let's say the urban salary taxpayer.
And finally, this open to both of you. When the economic survey came out, this with the they all pink cover and everything spoke about gender, focus on gender and women's rights, jobs for women. But there was very little focus for that in the actual budget.
Well, I think the one reference that he made a couple of references to the gender at large. So there was something that he said that he spoke of the success of the Sukanya Samriddhi account scheme, and he said he'll do something. I didn't quite catch what it is that, but maybe we'll wait for and see how it comes up. Then he also mentioned about women, the first 3 years of employment to encourage female employment. That he would the women can pay a lower percentage of employee contribution to Provident Fund, which is currently at 12%. So women can pay 8%, and the employer's contribution remains the same at 12%. So on the one hand, it increases cash flow to the female worker. On the other hand, of course, there's a dip in the savings because your contribution, somewhere you were doing a forced saving. But I suppose if the organizations have a voluntary PF scheme, then they could possibly put in that additional one there if they wanted to. But at least the choice is with the women. So from that aspect, I'm happy.
Yeah, but no young woman wants to put her money in voluntary PF, trust me.
So, and I think one more interesting thing which I would be curious to see how this scheme comes out is he mentioned first years of employment. Now you may have a, speaking from a gender perspective, we are also, a lot of big organizations are trying to get more and more women come back into the employment sector because many of them drop off due to family reasons. So I would be curious to see how this pans out and whether, does it mean necessarily somebody who is initially joining, or it is also somebody who is rejoining an organization and maybe doesn't have an existing, so all new PF registrants will get this benefit. So then that is a good thing to incentivize re-employment again.
Do you think even with the current proposal as it stands, do you think the government should have offered to make up for that shortfall of 4% to the employees' contribution?
I am not
For the first
sure
3
because
years.
the government, while the government has made some scheme about contributing the 12% to new employees, I would think it would apply to certain sectors and not to the established private sectors. I can't imagine the government having that much funds at disposal to do that.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's a welcome move. At least helps some section of the people.
And Alok, what do you think?
Yeah,
Women
just-
starting out, there's a...
Just to add a couple of points to temper the enthusiasm on this. One is that the contribution is likely to be limited to the wage ceiling of 15,000 per month. So I don't think they are going to contribute to the full salary, which is the common practice by most of us in order to maximize the tax benefit. I would be very surprised if I'm wrong on this one. And the other is that if you see, they already have a contribution for up to 8.33%, which they are enhancing to 12%, and that itself is for a very limited set of people. It doesn't cover again the urban, let's say the white-collared salary taxpayers. So perhaps this measure for women as well may be in the same kind of population, same kind of profile. So again, it may not cover many women in the urban
We'll have to
workforce.
wait and see how the scheme actually, the details of the scheme work out.
And also there's always conversation about how for women starting out, there's always a gender disparity in pay. So ultimately, even if your take home goes up by that much, your male co-worker might be making just as much.
Could be. The way I look at it is, if there's at least any sort of relief, it's a relief. And if it encourages more people to come back into the workforce, I'm happy.